Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 475 of the Constructive Criticism Podcast. I am your host, Heezy, and I'm joined by my co-host, the man who always comes in clutch. They might say he is that guy. It's Mason Clark.
Hey, I'm glad that you're feeling better now. Unfortunately, Abe is still sick, but I'm glad we were able to get the Ross episode out sort of really, really last minute, relative to the time where we could get it to y'all in a timely way, and it kind of worked out. So it was good.
It was so funny behind the scenes because, I think I texted you guys Saturday or something, I texted you Sunday, the day before. And I was like, I don't have a voice. I actually can't talk. And then Abe was like, "Fun fact, I have COVID," and Mason was like, "Okay."
Abe said I had COVID Monday morning.
Oh, that's right.
He didn't reply for a day because he was sick with COVID.
Yeah,
he passed out, which was another fun part of it. Of I guess it'll just be Abe and I too. What are we gonna do?
It's too good. You're too clutch, man. You're too clutch, and it was a really fun episode. I'm really glad that the listeners got to hear it. This week, though, we're going to be talking about Modern and all of the events on Magic Online that by the way, are massive. I don't know if you've seen the numbers, Mason. These Magic Online events for Modern are getting pretty big. But all of those events since Wilds of Eldraine came out and doing a power ranking on there. Before we do that, though, let's get to the point of the show. Always improving. We always want to be getting better each and every week in any way that we can. Mason, let's let you go first. What did you do this week to improve at Magic for Life in general?
The way that I worked on improving in Magic this week specifically was sort of trusting my gut. The first time I saw Agatha's Soul Cauldron, I was pretty sure it was great, and I should have just got him, but I didn't, and I kind of regret it, and I think Yogg is in a really good place, so I put a lot of work into that and really trying to figure out how I think that deck kind of works with this card and sort of is this the new one of the better things. And I'm sort of the opinion that and it's a little bit of a spoiler, that Yogg is significantly improved from Agatha's Soul Cauldron, and I don't want to go too detailed because I think that will be kind of the main topic. And spoilers, we will talk about Yawgmoth at some point. But I really worked on that deck and sort of honing things, trying different sideboard cards, talking to people about stuff, and trying to sort of figure out exactly where I want to be with Yogg if I'm going to be playing Yogg, because I am playing the Ragavan Secret Lair Showdown in Vegas this weekend, which is this $100 win this $5,000 Ragavan type thing. So I've incentivized to do well in Modern.
Dude, I have a funny story about this card, and it actually involves you. I was birding. I don't remember if it was one of the challenges or the super, but it was while you were on camera at Apex, and somebody plays the Cauldron, and you pick it up to read it. And I literally just slammed my hand on my desk and go, "Mason, how is that a reader? It was your card in the Pick 2 set review."
No, I thought seized it.
No, they cast it and you picked it up and read it. Guaranteed. Go back, roll the film, editor. Roll the film.
Maybe I did. I definitely. And I know for sure TJ, who listens to the show, because TJ didn't play it on turn 2 in one of the games, and I thought seized it. And I had Leyline of the Void the other game. And I thought, wow, if TJ just played this card, I couldn't win. and I double checked to make sure I had read it, because it had been a long time since I had read it again. But I we talked about it during the Pick 2 set review, right? It was one of my hits. I think that card is very, very good. And I think I understood how good
for once, I could be wrong here. You could have been thought seizing it and then thus reading it again during the thought seize.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure it did everything I thought it does, which is everything you imagine anything could do. Yeah. If you could do it, Agatha's does it.
I'm gonna have to go back and watch the VOD though to see if but it was so funny is I was watching with Matt because his round was over, and I was like, why is Mason picking up this card to read it? It was literally his Pick 2 card.
Hey, here's an always improvement moment for listeners. I double check things a lot. My full-time job is Magic. Listen, I worked on Modern Horizons 3. I know Modern. I double-check cards a lot. Sure. Just to be make sure. And there's nothing wrong with taking just a second to, sometimes I'm also just, skipping to check a certain line, if until end of turn, right? And ain't nothing wrong with taking a little extra second to read.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to make fun of you in this moment. That's.
Yeah, I know. But sometimes listeners, they don't know. They might think you're serious.
Oh,
I gotta help them out.
No, for one, I probably already read that card 11 times, and I would probably still read it again because, like Mason said, it does a lot of things.
it has like 3 different clauses of things happening, of like exiling, counter, gain abilities.
This is a good moment because today, Matt Kling and I were talking, and we were talking about the artifact in Hardened Scales.
There are a lot of artifacts in Hardened Scales.
Sorry,
You mean the Ozolith?
The Ozolith. Thank you. I was like,
okay.
The Ozolith, and he's like, did you know that that's leave play? And I was like, maybe I knew that. And he's like, yeah, because I freaking tried to bounce it with the fairy, and I was like, oh no, I've actually made the same mistake before. So because it's not dice.
Yeah, Ozolith is so weird with like also modular. Like I don't know how you will have played against that, but you'll play against a Morgan's Soul Cauldron. Like if let's say Spencer has an Arcbound Ravager in play and has the Ozolith and has like a other artifact creature, and I bolt his Arcbound Ravager, he can like sack it and the counter goes to the creature, but then another counter magically appears on the Ozolith.
Yes, correct.
Because the thing with the counter left play, and it's just like, wait, what happened? And then you just like often double the power out of nowhere, and it's just like, oh no, I'm dead. What happened?
Yeah, I played against that deck a lot with creativity, and you often just like have to like you're forced into killing the Ozolith just so that you can kill things throughout the whole game. Otherwise, things get out of hand.
Yeah.
So for me, always improving this week also involved reading a lot of cards because I downloaded Arena again. For those who don't know. Just to like get games in during certain times. There are certain times where like Magic Online's easier to play, and then there are certain times where just getting games in quickly is fun. So I downloaded it again. I haven't put any money back into it, but what I did do is I worked on Standard because we had a Standard episode coming up and Worlds coming up, and I wanted to make sure that I had hands on that format. And I obliterated Standard Mason. I made Standard my little friend, and it's cool. I had multiple patrons. One of them posted in the Discord that they were playing the deck. Another one reached out to me on Messenger that they've been playing the deck, and it's just like the black-green mid deck from the challenge with like quite a few changes. But man, it is a stark change. The difference that like just a few cheap spells can make for a deck compared to like something like the blue-black mid-range decks that had been taking over Standard for the last few months, and just the difference between those two decks is startling, both on my win percentage and then also the way the deck plays out. It's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, little things go a long way in Standard, right? Like I think that's pretty interesting. Is like in Modern, you can like metagame and do things, but a lot of times it's like your sideboard. And in Standard, you can do like whole changes, right? And like the power level of the cards is a lot more flat. There's often like a couple outliers, and everything's like pretty good. And then like like you have like Nissa in your deck, right? It's like the 7-drop Phyrexian one that I don't think is pretty common at the moment. And like that card completely changes the way games are allowed to play out. And like if your opponent just thinks you're on stock black-green mid-range, a Nissa coming down and like changing the power of the board immediately is just going to like dramatically change things. So it's really cool just to see how those things can innovate and change.
Yeah, and I think also Standard is like in a really interesting place where you saw Mono Red doing really, really well to start, which I just think that like aggro decks have been pretty underrepresented for basically as long as Sheoldred has been in Standard. So it's kind of nice to see the changes. And I actually got to play some Mono Red after I was crushing with Green Black, and it is certainly a deck you can play.
Is that your way of saying it's legal cards, or that you think it's fine?
It's fine. You play against it a lot on Arena right now, just because it's both done well in challenges and like is a good aggressive deck. But I still think it has a lot of the same problems, just with much better cards and a more solid game plan as the deck gets larger, or as the card pool gets larger, I guess I should say.
Yeah, it is really interesting, right? Because everything we just talked about is Standard, that is all under the guise, at least for me, of six set standard, right? Where I guess it's 8 set standard. Sorry, we are now entering a 9 to soon to 12 set standard, and it's gonna be really interesting because the bar becomes a lot higher for cards you see play once there's like more competition. So I still think we're gonna see a lot of cool stuff happen with standard in a way that you don't see. Like Worlds is in like 6 days, Spencer, and I cannot wait to watch Worlds on Sunday if I haven't won a brainstorm.
I actually have no idea what people are gonna play at this Worlds. Like the format seems like in an interesting place.
Yeah, I'm rooming with Dom, who guested on the show, and I thought about bringing a microphone and doing the night before the PT, get a little crossover episode, and have like a little like, all right, Dom, this is before Worlds. Sorry, it's the night before Worlds. How are you feeling? What's the confidence meter? So that when he crushes it, I can just be like, he was the GOAT. And then if he gets it wrong, never happened. It's gone.
Just don't post.
Oh, I lost my phone. Oh, no. I'm tweeting about it. Can someone help me find it?
If you want to support the show directly, head on over to patreon.com/CCMTG. If you have a patron of the show will always be free. We have a great community of people, though, if you want to check out the Discord, things like that. Just a quick shout out to our sponsor over at puremtgo.com, where we post the show every week. And, they give us the MTGO monies, and that helps support the show. So. And also, just once again, don't forget to sell your cards to MTGO traders if you don't have a subscription service, just to help keep the Magic Online economy reasonable. You got people who are always open, like Matt Kling. Turns out that if he had sold his chest this year, he thinks he'd be up hundreds of dollars, just hundreds and hundreds.
Could have been up thousands if he kept opening, and that's like
true.
Doesn't give up.
It's never give up. Trust your instincts. And then just a quick announcement before we get into our main topic. If you're a patron, you already know that this is coming. But I should be scheduling. I had three of them message me today. I have invited every single co-host in the history of constructive criticism to celebrate the 10-year anniversary that happens this fall to come on a bonus episode and just talk about the show, talk about Magic, talk about their life. It's really exciting. I already have show notes written. You're going to do Kyle first, who is on episode 1, the pilot, and that was it. So it'll be a fun one because he has the behind the scenes of like the shows that were almost shows instead of CCMTG before we finally hit the record button, and how like I finally made the decision like, all right, this is actually the show we're going to do. It's going to be about helping PTQ grinders win PTQs. And it's cool to see, and he's also a listener to the show, and he knows how the show's changed, so it'll be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting to see everything happen, It's going to be, I don't know when they're coming out, but it's going to be cool to see it. Do you plan to, like, drip feed them or just kind of, like, drop them?
Yeah, I'm going to drip feed them. So, like, I'll do Kyle probably next week, and then I think John wants to be on pretty soon, so John will probably be after that.
John Stern, Canadian Master.
Canadian Master and nicest guy in Magic, in my opinion.
Top 5 for sure.
He has to apparently compete with Zikenik, but
yeah, Zikenik's up there for sure too. So like, it's rough out there.
Yeah, I get it. Mason's like top 10, so he's like trying to weave his way up.
I'm bubbling, you know what I mean? But like, I'm happy with the top 8. You know what I mean?
Let's talk about Modern rankings this week, and this is all data after Wilds of Eldraine. So how do the rankings work? If you are new to the Power Rankings on CCMTG, this is hundreds of episodes old at this point. I think we did one of these in the first 10 plus episodes of CC. It's 6 points for first, 5 points for second, 4 for a top 4, 3 for a top 8, 2 for a top 16, 1 for a top 32 if the tournament's big enough. I did not have time to do top 32s this time, so all of our points are based off of top 16s, and the events that are included is every challenge and the super since Wilds of Eldraine. And I want to talk really quickly about this. That normally I would, and in the past, if you've heard me, I've spent the time to go into Twitter, to go into places to find out what won the Apex, what won the face-to-face, what won the other stuff. And MTG Melee, if you want to send a request to them on one feature that would be helpful for stuff like this, it would be to include final standings, because they don't do that.
I can tell you Apex was won by Scam, fan of the show, Don Delosier.
There we go.
Yeah. Copied Nathan Stoyer card for card and won, beating Yawgmoth in the finals.
So the other thing that I want to say before we dive into these, and I know that I would have a problem with this if I was a Mason Clark, is the way that we combined Omnath decks. But there's so many Omnath decks, Mason.
I think right now is the one time I'm not going to be like, wah, about it, because there are a lot of different ones.
75 card Omnath. There's Bring to Light Omnath. There's 4-color and 5-color classic Omnath. There's so many.
Yeah. I'm surprised I haven't seen. I saw one person play Bowmaster Omnath. I was surprised I haven't seen more of that, to be honest. Because of, I don't know, the mirrors and stuff. But anyways, yeah, like, Omnath is in a weird spot. I don't want to, bury the lead here. We'll get to that eventually. But yeah, that is our one caveat. Every other deck is sort of separated and is what it is. But our Omnath decks are in a big pile. So take that with a grain of salt. Maybe, knock 5 points off, whatever, if you want to. But they all are trying to do a similar game plan.
Yeah.
And very few of them are like Valakut type stuff, even though I think there are a couple. So, like, I don't know. If it was me, I'd knock 5 points off and call it a day. It's not going to be the end of the world.
Wouldn't
You're going to be
even
fine.
affect the power rankings.
Yeah, it would just be like slightly smaller number, worse person, as they say.
I do want to just mention our honorable mentions really quick because they were pretty close to our 8th place deck. We have Murktide with 12 points, and to shock the world, coming back from the Titan Shift with 12 points.
Yeah, I think Titan Shift's in a kind of a nice spot. It's really good against the Omnath decks. And this is one of those things, too, where last summer when I was running around the world killing everyone with the Omnath, it's like, I know it beats me. If you want to do the Scape Shift stuff, I won't win. But in that point in time, Murktide was a huge part of the metagame, too. And that not being as big a prevalence, and now Scam sort of usurping Murktide as the mid-rangey sort of grinder deck of choice, has really changed what is like players are willing to bring. And Titan Shift is a deck that sort of dumps on the Omnath decks. And while not the best against Scam, it is not the worst. Like, if you have the right hands, you can sort of dump really quickly and start Valakutting and kill them.
I'd rather be Titan Shift than Amulet against Scam, which says something. But I'd still be the better big, I would still be favored against Tron, for example, of another big mana deck. So there's a lot to like about Titan Shift. Murktide, there's a lot to like too right now. The main problem here is the just getting buried by beans is the real problem for Murktide. I just there's so many beans that I think it's a legitimate problem for the deck. I don't know how to solve it. Because other than that, I think the deck is actually really well positioned.
Yeah, I think this has always been a Murktide problem for what it's worth. That the 4-color decks, you just gobble up Murktide. It wasn't good when it was 80 cards. It's gotten, basically the same now as 60. And, Beanstalk sometimes we're seeing more than 60, which we'll get to later. But, I think just on a core level, it's really hard for your deck that's trying to protect one threat to have the one threat against Murktide, especially when the counter spells are how you often protect it. And Teferi Time Raveler, while it is weak to Force Negation and Subtlety, which are now parts in the main deck which weren't before, you do have to draw those cards in the right lineup against Teferi, because if you stick the Teferi and you can get it out of Unholy Heat range, or even just, you fight over Murktide, you kind of lose, and then you stick Teferi, unsummon it, that can be huge. And the difference between an 8/8 and a 5/5 Murktide against a deck with Omnath is actually huge. So I think the matchup, you're just kind of behind it, and there's not much you can really do. And I really actually like the approach a lot of people have been of I got a couple Blood Moons, I got my normal game plan, I got some subtleties, for the Scam deck, it's good against Omnath. If you beat me, you beat me, but I can't beat the matchup, so I'm not going to dedicate 10 spots to it or whatever. I'm not going to change what's wrong with it.
Yeah. I mean, and we had, I think it was right before WoW came out, so it's not including in this. There was a challenge that 6 of the top 8 was Murktide. Had that been included?
Yeah, right after Preordain.
Yeah, exactly. Right after the Preordain unban. So it's not like this deck is bad. It's just there's just so many beans. I don't know.
I was just going to say, if you're listening at home and you're someone who loves Murktide, or maybe you have Murktide, but you have most of Scam or Rhinos or something, right? Yeah, like you're a Spencer, and you're oh man, the guys on the show, blah, blah, it sounds like I shouldn't be playing it. Murktide is still a fine deck, but once again, it is if you are really good, you will do better than Murktide than the average person. but I think you'll do that with all the decks, to be fair, that are good in Modern. And so, like, Murktide is just fine. And if anyone ever came to me like, yeah, I won my RCQ with Murktide, I would not be surprised, because Murktide is a good deck.
It's a reasonable deck, gamer deck. And to be completely transparent with the listener, I personally, before still feeling a little under the weather on Saturday, had Murktide sleeved up. I was going to play it with a sideboard guide. List posted in the Discord, that's knowing that people love Omnath. Like, I still think it's a totally reasonable deck for your RCQ. But we all know I'm going to Triton Shift the next time I get a chance. Let's be honest.
You gotta do it while the beans are hot, man. I think your matchup against Lasso is kind of rough, but the beans are good.
Let's talk about making some beans hot, and let's talk about Burn really quick. This deck is so funny, Mason, because it gets no results offline.
I think Burn low-key sucks. And we can go into that in a bit. And I think part of what you're saying is why, though.
I don't even understand. I am in a lot of matches of Magic Online these days, and I don't know what Burn legitimately beats.
Yeah, it's pretty good against Omnath, but it's not like a slam dunk. Right, like their Omnath, if he can stick and get a land, typically game over. It's kind of an unbeatable situation. You're fine-ish against Scam, but like you're not like over the moon. Your Coffers matchup isn't that great. Your Yogg matchup, I think, is pretty good, but like the rest of these, I don't super love. Living End, you really need your Rolling Vortexes. Rhino is kind of a similar spot. Murktide is like your worst matchup. Time Shift is probably a race, probably slightly favored Burn because they're on the play half the time. But I think a lot of people think Burn and they see it and they're like, yeah, it like beats on these top decks, and that's why you will see it do well in Modern on Moto sometimes, because like the metagame is different on Moto than it is in real life, and that's like important to note that like playing Magic Online is playing a living card game where everyone basically has access to all the cards. And not actually everyone, but like kind of, I would say 70 to 80% of the people who play challenges consistently use services like Man Traders, like Card Hoarder. And that means they have access to all the cards. So the metagame actually shifts. In the real world, it is very hard to shift like that and to be on top of the metagame and play the best deck all the time. And so in the abstract world, maybe, Scam is the best deck, right? But it's really hard for everyone in paper to get Scam in time to have for an RCQ. So you can have that read with Murktide, with Burn, that like you want to burn out Scam or whatever in Omnath, like sure, but most of the room just won't have it. And in RCQs, not everyone's there to win, and on Magic Online, predominantly you're playing either for fun or to win, and kind of with the challenges to the high entry, it sort of leans that way. So I think Burn is just not actually that strong. It leans on speed more than anything and efficiency of cards. And I think it is deceptively hard to play, doesn't have many good matchups, and is really hard to like actually beat a room. Cards in Modern are so good now that you just don't get that advantage of invalidating things with lava spikes, etc. People can just play the whole hands, and that is often a recipe for disaster for Burn.
So of decks with over 100 matches recorded on mtgdecks.com or .net, Burn has 3 good matchups. They are 4-color Creativity.
That matchup is free.
Mono Green Tron and 4-color Omnath. And every other matchup with over 100 matches played is losing. And there's and for what it's worth, its matchups against Hammer Time and Murktide are atrocious.
Yeah, Murktide is like literally worst case scenario. If you played Old Burn and you knew Jund, imagine Jund, but except instead of Thoughtseize Inquisition, they have Counterspell Spell Pierce.
Yeah.
It's like, oh Lord, I'm dead. And then like Hammer, here's the secret. If you're a Hammer gamer, you're like, how did they win? They always deflecting upon me. I'm gonna break your brain for a second. Just search up Shadow Spear and put it on a creature and just hit them a little bit. And just don't hammer them.
Fun fact, Hammer Time is its worst matchup of those. By like a lot.
The 10 of Shadow Spear deck is very good against Burn. Yeah, it's like nice.
Here's the thing. This deck does well on Magic Online. Like, so I'm not gonna pretend that it doesn't, because it does. I just don't see people losing to it outside of like I guess, like, yeah, they drew 3 burn spells in a row off the top, and I lost, like, and I drew lands. Like, that is the time that I see people losing to it. And I just don't know that I put that much faith in, you know, I'm not Yu-Gi-Moto, man. Like, I just don't have the heart of the cards like that. And I don't know.
I mean, in that situation described, how often are you actually losing if you do any? Like, if you played Yawgmoth and you draw 3 lands, I draw 3 spells.
No, that's a good point.
It's like, if I go halfling, young wolf, maybe that's something you can beat, but like, probably not even. That's like a lot of power, you know, if you're just drawing lands.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's tough. It's tough out here. I also think that Burn is an extremely hard deck to play, so I just wouldn't want to pick it up for an RCQ. So
you don't get bonus points for playing hard decks. Let me tell you, someone who's played a bunch of Omnath, it's just, you don't get bonus points. I want to mention something too, by the way. I forgot about Tron when listing the good matchups, and your creativity and Tron are both just slam dunkers. But like, that is where I think Tron's at. We don't have to get into this if you don't want to. I am a Tron not truther. I think Tron is pretty bad. And I think it had its place in the metagame for the Pro Tour. And I'm just sort of like not respecting Tron right now. And maybe that's going to bite me. Like, people are just going to play it. But I think that deck is just not that. Like, it's just not it.
I think that we've talked about 3 decks that all have good Tron matchups.
Yeah.
So.
True. We're talking about a 4th?
I actually don't think this deck has a good Tron matchup, but we can talk about it.
Oh, you don't think Rhinos has a good Tron matchup?
No,
interesting.
But let's talk about Rhinos.
Yeah.
So Rhinos comes in next. It comes in with, oh my gosh, I just lost my page. It comes
17
in
matchups.
17 points. Thank you. And what's funny is, like, the Cascade decks were on, like, the downest of turns before WoW, and it didn't get anything new. People just went back to the stuff that they enjoyed playing that they thought was good before, after the pre-order and after WoW came out. I think Rhinos is fine. This is just the definition of a fine deck. I've never lost a competitive match of Magic with Rhinos, so, like, you know, I just, you know,
with or 2?
With. I've never lost with it.
Oh, you just crush everyone with Rhinos.
Yeah, I've literally never lost with Rhinos, so.
Nice.
Oh,
I've only lost with Rhinos.
I think that's not true. I think I lost my first match ever, and then I've won every one since. I apologize.
I think I'm the opposite. I think I won round 1 of an energy when I borrowed a deck, and then lost everyone after it.
But I think the deck is fine. And, like, jokes aside about me playing 1K with the deck, I think that the world of Modern actually became really interesting for Rhinos when 4/4 started to become the biggest thing again. Because something that ends up happening a lot, like with Murktide, for example, is you're kind of forced into playing your Mercs a little earlier than you would want to normally, which makes Murktides smaller, which makes Rhinos bigger, in my opinion, as far as, like, the scaling of creatures goes overall in the format. And also, like, just heads up, people, there was only one Green X Saga deck in this entire field, and that's the only other deck that makes something bigger than Rhinos, basically. I guess Death Shadow does, but there were 0 of those.
Yeah, Death Shadow is a weird. Death Shadow is also really funny with the Rhinos and Trample. You really put your opponent to the "Do you know Magic's mechanics" test. Anyways, yeah, I agree.
4/4's got huge. Like, they're just big now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and, like, I think, like, a great point you mentioned, like, so it's kind of hard to think about, right? But like Spencer mentioned, like, let's say Spencer and I are playing, I put some Rhinos in play real quick, and Spencer even makes a 6/6 Murktide. The fact that my Rhino with a Dead Gone or Fire Ice trades is actually huge, to speak to what Spencer is saying. It's like, I know it doesn't seem like it's much, but it's actually a ton. And heaven forbid he puts a 5/5 out, because then Violent Outburst is suddenly a kill spell. And Spencer's like, oh no, it made 2 4/4s and it pushed the damage and it killed my Murktide. I can never win. I'm dead. And while that matchup is pretty good, I do think Rhinos is just fine. I have gone from a year ago, I think it was awful, and I will stand by that, to now I think it is a fine deck that has weekends of being good. And if you like the Rhinos deck, there are worse decks to be a one trick of or whatever. But I think it is stone cold just fine. And it was really good when Mystical Dispute was like a thing that you could really lean on. And I think it was a fine deck for PTs. Like, if you just think there's going to be some type of decks, like, it is nice against Yawgmoth, for example. Like, it is a strong Yawgmoth matchup, and if you think that's going to be represented at the Pro Tour, it's a good choice. Also, I know some Pro Tour players thought a lot of the people who weren't on testing teams were just going to bring Murktide. That ended up not happening. But like, this deck is good against Murktide, right? So like, it has some really good matchups, and it just does a pretty good tempo game plan, right? Like, put the threat down, free spell to stop your thing, hit you for 8, call it a day. So it's fine.
Yeah, next up we have another Cascade deck coming in with only one more point. We have Living End.
The natural predator rhinos. One more point. That's because they eat up all the rhino players. It is sort of the mirror breaker in the Cascade decks until Glimpse Food becomes a thing.
I think that Living End is exactly what I think Rhinos is. It's a fine deck. It has its weekends. If people aren't prepared for it, it's like a really good choice. It makes the game about something, and if people aren't prepared for that something, they're gonna lose. It's exactly what Rhinos does.
Yeah, I have a question for you that I want to ask. I will say this really quickly, that one thing I like about Living End is that it's deceptively hard. And I think it doesn't get enough credit for, like, some of its turns are really tough in the early game, where like you're having to sequence like griefs, like when you go for them and like that sort of stuff. I think that can be pretty tough. But so my question to you is, of Living End and Rhinos, which do you sort of prefer more? I know you played Rhinos in a team tournament when you broke the metagame, but like, what about like in the abstract? Like, which one do you think you would pull the trigger on more if you had to pull the trigger? Like, let's say to play 100 tournaments simultaneously at once, which one are you putting the button of, Living End or Rhinos?
Well, one of them is a teamer deck, so I guess they're both teamer decks.
True.
Here's the thing: Grief is a heck of a magic card, right? Mm-hmm. But I just probably would prefer the gameplay of Rhinos. The thing is we kind of talked about this last time you and I did the show alone together, where you threw me right under the bus about learning mirror matches, talking about the Living End mirror match. And let me tell you how many games of Living End I've played since that discussion, Mason. And it rhymes with Shiro. Yeah, it's not a lot.
I think Living End's nice. I don't know. I will say this. I think if I had to play 100 tournaments, I like the idea of Rhinos and more. But like, if 100 tournaments on the right weekend
with Living End,
yeah, you're going to win a lot of terms with Living End. You're going to top 8 a lot of terms with Rhinos.
I agree with that.
And I think that's a big distinction.
Let's talk about a deck that I'm kind of surprised is still top 8ing.
Wow, I did not know that's how you felt about this deck. I'm excited.
So I want to talk about Yogg coming in with 23 points. I'm actually just kidding. I think this deck is cool. But I do have questions for you, Mason. Somebody finally did the thing. Somebody finally played the Grazer Halfling version to top 8 a challenge. How did you think you and Jerry should feel inside your souls now?
I trusted Zerk. Zerk did it one time, and the thing about Zerk, the Yogg one trick, is he just always plays Yogg differently every weekend. And when you do it different every weekend, you're going to eventually hit the masterpiece and then mess it up. And someone else who's also a genius realized, oh, wow, that's broken. That being said, I'm maybe playing this deck in the Winter Ragavan this weekend. I plan to not play Grazers. But that's because of Agatha Soul Cauldron. Things changed. But I do like the Grazer Delight Halfling. I think it's nice. I think that stuff is pretty strong.
I did not put together the fact that you might be playing. What does Zerk's list look like? He just top 8'd a challenge for this.
I'm playing very similar to Zerk's list. I have like one card different, I think. He has Necromancia, so I'm just not going to play that in real life.
Yeah,
I have like a
you're not a psychopath?
I think Necromancia is fine. It's just like, I think it's very much a Magic Online thing where people gravitate towards like specific decks, and he's like hard targeting decks. And I'm just trying to have a more open thing for this open qualifier in Vegas. So
this is hot.
Have you Fulminator Mage with Agatha Soul Cauldron, by the way? All your creatures with the counters become the Fulminator Mage. It's nice. I have blown up some Tron lands and some.
I have a fun Fulminator Mage story where we were debating what cards to play in sideboard slots for the team tournament, and Fulminator Mage came up as like kind of this hot tech for multiple decks, where it's like, wait a second, if you put a counter on, like moving counters around, Fulminator Mage was like a real conversation about like getting to blow up multiple lands. It was hot.
It's nice. It's a good card.
About this deck, though, I think that this deck has a lot of game. I was surprised to learn that apparently it is not universally believed that this is the worst matchup for creativity. I think that it's creativity's worst matchup, but apparently that's not a common belief. Mm-hmm. I guess the Soul Cauldron might make me change the tune on this deck quite a bit. I had not considered that in this deck.
I mentioned it during the pick too, man. Come on.
I don't listen to you, man. No, I'm just kidding.
That's just true.
No.
But Agatha Soul Cauldron. So the thing about Agatha's, though, that is I think really important to notice and try and understand is that one of Yogg's main problems, and part of the reason it has like a struggling 4-color matchup, is that it has 8 really good cards. It has 4 Grist, 4 Yawgmoth, and those cards are good. They are very, very strong. Surprisingly, Modern Horizon cards, who knew? But those cards can really carry games on their own. And there are some games you have to win where you don't have them, where they get answered. And Agatha's Soul Cauldron turns basically all of your creatures into those once they're answered, which means that you actually have like some redundancy in your threats. And it opens up whole new lines and whole new combos, right? So, for example, Walking Ballista is a card that you're seeing a lot of one of in the decks now, because now you can Agatha's the Walking Ballista and then put your counter on your Young Wolf, right? Have a Blood Artist in play, remove the counter, kill the Young Wolf, it comes back, you shoot the Young Wolf a million times, they die. And Walking Ballista is just not a weak card in your deck full of mana dorks. So you can just play it and it like lines up. Like if you think Bowmaster is good against things with 1 toughness, Walking Ballista is like basically a bad version of that at X's 2 and a better version at higher things, right? So that is something that like this deck gained access to. So its card quality went up a lot. And if you notice, Zerk's like down to I think 2 Strangleroot guys, 4 Young Wolf, and just has like a bunch of good cards. And is I think jokingly calling the deck on Twitter like black-green toolbox. And like it's just, playing a mid-range game that has a combo finish. And that's the thing that's really appealing to me about this deck. You are like finally a real mid-range deck with a combo. And Young Wolf is the best it's ever been in Modern. I dunk on that card a lot, but it is surprisingly well positioned. And like that is just nice. Like just blocking a Fury for a turn and getting it back to set up time for your Grist, or like stonewalling Ragavans, or blocking Hammer type things, or being part of a combo. These are all really, really good things. So I think this deck is a little underappreciated. I think it is very, very hard to play at like the highest level. It's like you can cruise pretty easily, but like to play it at the peak is very hard. And I think players are going to be picking this deck up more and more as Agatha Soul Cauldron comes, because it turns all your creatures into Grist, into Yawgmoth, turns them into Haywire Might Spencer. I watched TJ, the guy got second at Apex, Haywire Might against Hammer, and I was like, oh lord, that's brutal. Turns them all into Wall of Roots, which is really crazy, right? Like suddenly your things now generate mana like instantaneously. And there's a lot of weird things it does. Like all your creatures become halflings, they all become ignobles. So it is like we're just scratching the surface on what you can do. And like I mentioned, right? Like I put Fulminator Mage in my deck. I'm like a Quarter Calling deck or whatever, like an Eldritch Evolution deck. I can find that, and then against those decks, I have like a billion Fulminator Mages. That like really changes things. Is that maybe the right thing to do? I don't know. We're all figuring it out still, but like that is a whole new element to this deck, and now the deck has so many more power cards.
I do remember what it was, by the way. It was Scam with Fulminator Mage. You give your Fulminator Mage on deck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I was just kidding about Yogg being bad. I just the deck beats my favorite deck, so that's all I was saying.
You're good.
I do want to talk about the next deck, because I found one of the notes that I have on this is that 100% of this deck was actually a Cabal Coffers deck, and that's mono black, coming with 1 more point at 24. But there's not like the mono black mid range. There's not like the mono black control. They're all Coffers decks. 100% of them are Coffers, Mason, and that is kind of different than what we were seeing just a month ago, where there were like 3 different versions. I think the Field of the Death version and the Coffers version kind of just like did a fusion dance, and they're like, okay, this is it. But I will also say this. I sent the power rankings to Matt and Quentin today, the 2 people that I played the most Magic with, and their responses were very much like, oh yeah, this is aligned with what we see in the challenges, except for the deck that we'll talk about next. But the thing that I said is, I said this in our Patreon Discord, that Mono Black Coffers has to be the most popular deck I've ever seen in Magic ever. I don't know if you have jumped in a league, Mason, but holy freaking crap. This deck sees a lot of play. And I actually think 4th place at 24 points is underperforming for this deck a lot for how much you will see it in a challenge or how much you will see it in a league.
I worry a little bit about tying its strength to league stuff, just because leagues are sort of like a lot of people experiment with stuff. You know what I mean? I was very interesting. I don't know if you listened to the JRT podcast this week, but Dave Shields said, I bet you most of your opponents are in their first 5 games when you play against them. Because I think what he was hinting at is this deck is very cool. And I agree with that. I think this deck is super cool. I mean, this is sort of a thing that people when I first started playing Magic, they're like, oh yeah, Mono Black Control back in the day. It was so sick. I'm always trying to recapture that high. And this is that deck. And that is awesome for those people. And I think it is a fine deck, maybe a little underpowered some weekends, overpowered others. It has some strengths, so we can talk about in a second. But I do think this deck is got something going on. And I think being a really good Bowmaster Shielded Ring deck is just a strong place to be and really strong in the mirrors.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's definitely taken all the places of those blue-black decks that people were playing against, things like that. I'm just saying I would be careful being oh, this deck I really got 4th in the CCMTG power rankings that 10 decks. Yes. And it's yeah, it did. It's a good deck, but it's probably the most played deck by a little bit of a margin right now because everybody is so hyped that Mono Black is good again. And the fact that, we'll get into some decks that legitimately have a ton of points.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one thing to remember too is that, for example, first off, whenever we do these shows, unless a deck has 50 more points than the other decks or whatever, then I just wouldn't care too much about their actual ranking. If there's a delineation of a big jump, then you should care, in my opinion, in a real way. But the difference between Yogg and Mono Black Coffers is that Doomwake won with Coffers. And had he lost, it would be below Yogg. Yeah. So, just keep in mind that one match of Magic is the reason we're saying it's the 4th instead of, maybe the 5th or 6th best. And, it's really about, the words and the reasons behind it. And I think, once again, there are good, Mono Black Coffers probably has a good Yawgmoth matchup. I actually have not played it. Everyone keeps talking about this deck. I see it on streams. I watch it a bunch, and then I never run into it.
You've never played against Mono Black?
I assume I can't win. Playing Yogg. It's just I'm trying to draw cards. They have Bowmaster and Shieldred, and I try to assemble a creature kill combo, and they've got the kill spells. Although Cauldron does do a lot to fix that.
I don't think that I've seen a single person between me, Matt, and Quentin play a league without running into Coffers, and I certainly don't think that we've played a challenge without running into Coffers either.
Yeah, I haven't played against them literally a month.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I'm the high side of variance.
No, I think this deck has a lot going for it. One thing that's really nice, one thing that it kind of has a problem with is that it is a lot better when it draws Coffers. It's got the Nykthos problem that way. I think that one of the things that's nice about it is that because it's a ring deck, it can kind of afford to have that problem. It gets to play this Thoughtseize mid-range game plan with Orcus Bowmasters and Sheldred until it draws a ring. And go from there with Karn. But the games where it has Coffers, it is a lot better. Trying to think if there's any... and then one other thing that I like about it is it doesn't dedicate its entire sideboard every time to... There are some that have, 20 card... Or 20... That have, 11 plus cards. But usually it's I think the list from, for example... The face-to-face, the one that I have up, that has 2 Jurox and 2 Break the Ice, and you're probably...
Do you mean you're dedicated to Karn?
Yeah, dedicated to Karn, thank you. Yeah. But I assume that there are some number of the time where you're still boarding in some of those other pieces. So you're not all in the way that other decks are dedicated to their Karn sideboard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just you don't have stuff you want to wish for, right? And you have cards you want to play. It's pretty reasonable. I think people... in high power formats often don't play smaller Karn wish boards. In Pioneer though, it ain't worth it. But here it's there's strong cards you can sideboard. You can play them, it's fine.
Well, let's talk about the next deck. We finally do get a jump in points. All of these have been kind of really small jumps in points, deck by deck by deck by deck, for the most part. We do get a full tournament win level above the next deck here, with Amulet coming with 30 points. And when showing this to my friends, one of my friends responded that he thinks this might be the most overperforming deck compared to how much it's played. The opposite of Coffers, where like this deck does not see a lot of Magic Online play for a lot of reasons. Kind of a tough one to play on Magic Online, kind of a tough one to pick up for a lot of people. I think that barrier is a little bit more broken than it was a few years ago, and I think the ring helps even break that barrier even a little bit more. But yeah, I would say that this is one of the least popular, like other than Titan Shift. I would guess that like if we were to order these decks by how much they're played on Magic Online, I would say this is the second least.
Yeah, Amulet, it is hard to play, right? And it is hard to play normally, and it is hard to play on Magic Online, and it will just kind of get you sometimes. I think the deck is good, and I think like there's a lot of people on Moto who are like Amulet one tricks, and like I mean that not in a derogatory way. I just mean like they play Amulet all the time. They've mastered Amulet's in a good spot right now. We're talking about turn 2, the one rings in some situations, right? Turn 3 pretty consistently. That is good. And like this deck has some really strong power to it and has some pretty good matchups. It's really polarizing here. Like Burn used to be a really good matchup with Radiant Fountain. If you have that, it's great or whatever. You're faster than most of the other decks. So like Titan Shift's average draw is faster than you, but you can go faster than them. You're really good against the Omnath decks. Your Yawgmoth matchup is kind of a race. So like, and then a bunch of other decks that aren't on our list, you're kind of like pretty good against. And that has a lot of merit to it. And I think that's the thing to keep in mind too about Modern is like, we're talking about like 10 decks here today, but there are like 15 to 20 decks that are like real choices that you should not be surprised if they win your RCQ or you're seeing them at your RCQ at like the minimum. And so having game against those and also sort of the chaff with like the decks that like are a little bit more sketchy is really good. And Amulet does that, but just being a powerful proactive deck that can turn to anyone. I don't care how bad your matchup is. You have like a 4% chance just to win, and you just combo them and they die and you win. So deck's nice.
There were 24 decks that got points using top 16s. And I think it would have possibly gone to like 30 decks or more using top 32s. Just to kind of add on to what Mason's saying about, we're talking about 10 decks, and that's less than half of the decks that we could have talked about that got points in the power rankings in these 200 plus person modern events these days. I think Amulet's in a really good place. I like what you said about the Titan Shift thing, because it's like an interesting question. Because we talked about Coffers, we talked about Titan Shift, we've mentioned Tron. It's like, what big mana thing do you want to do? What's the most reasonable thing to do? You have one side of Coffers, right? That's like this mid-rangey version. That's like, well, I'll just plead like a Nykthos deck, and then if I draw my Nykthos, then I'm good. Then you've got like the ramp version in Titan Shift. That's like, okay, well, I'm just going to have a wish package that's a little bit different and just try to kill you consistently on the same turn every game. Then you've got this weird one. Then you've got Tron, which is just Tron. I don't think that there's another way to describe it. It's like a control deck that gets to play.
Has a lot of mana.
Yeah, that just has a lot of mana. And then you have Amulet, which is different than all of them. And also, I think, has wild different builds through metagames and through things. And it's interesting to see that. Because, like, Tron can change what? Like, 8 cards? 15 cards?
Maybe. Yeah.
Titan Shift is changing a lot more cards these days, but that's because it has to adapt. And then Coffers is a new deck. The big mana decks are interesting because they also have to fight each other. And I do think that Amulet, like if I was going to pick You told me everybody's showing up with big mana. What do you want to play? I would play Amulet. Like, I do think that Titan Shift has, like, an argument because it has a good Tron matchup. I'm sure it has a good Yogg matchup, or Yogg monoblock matchup. But Amulet is the one that, like, now if we're not interacting, my mulligans are going to be busted. Like, they're going to be so good. And I think that gives this deck, I think that's why it has the edge over something like Coffers.
Yeah, I love what you said there. I agree. I also think that, like, to the point about, like, changing cards, a lot of these decks are locked into one or maybe two colors, right? Like, Titan Shift is a green-red deck, but, like, doesn't often really play a lot of cards. Like, there's not a lot of things that can shift matchups in those departments, right?
No.
And, like, Tron's colorless, right? Mono black, Coffer, Spoilers is mono black. Amulet has access to all 5 colors. And we see people like Dom Harvey mistaken in on Magic Online experiment with what you're supposed to be doing. And, like, you know, sometimes it's Swan Song, sometimes, you know, it's Fluster, sometimes it's, you know, my brain's breaking, but, you know, insert attack card, Rooksar or whatever from the old days, right? There's just a lot of different things you can do, and you can adapt to sort of what's going on in a much better way. Because when you have all this mana, you also have access to a lot of cards that are different, right? Everyone else is playing with, like, outside of the Omnath decks, they're playing with a low amount of mana, you know, by turn 5, you know, like even Coffers kind of needs a lot of swamps to really turn on. And then if it gets Urborg Coffers, it just goes to the moon or whatever. But, like, basically you just get to do a lot of different things. And that's, I think, really powerful. And your deck is typically, the way you build it is all tutorable. Once you get a Titan, you basically have every card in your deck in your hand. And one of the cool things about this deck is, you know, we've seen players experiment with, like, cutting Dryads, cutting Azusa's, playing Explorers, right? Like, while I think Dryad is a really strong card and I would have a hard time cutting it, I think on Magic Online, where, like, metagames are different, you can maybe do stuff like that and play a bunch of Explore effects and just be like, no, your spot removal doesn't really matter. I'm just going to chain Titans and I'm going to just kill you. Yeah. And also, if I have 2 amulets, this is broken. This is better than Seething Song. Go. You know, and it's just like, oh my God.
Yeah, I to add to your point, I was thinking about different cards that I could buy for Titan and, like, pick up Titan again, because 2 second places in challenges, that's nothing to shake a tail feather at. Like, that's like a legitimate contender in the format for the time being. And Acid Moss, like, was in my brain. I'm like, think about the difference here. Like, you're talking about any cards you want in Titan, in Amulet Titan, and I'm thinking about putting an Acid Moss in my deck to wish for.
No, I legit think that's true. And this is the thing that was said to me by, well, not to me, but on the podcast by Brian Gottlieb. But I'll say it now, and hopefully it helps someone else out. Long time ago, before I was esports, I used to play decks over me around, and someone told me, and I still think this is true, Amulet Titan is one of the few decks that the more time you put into it, the more you get out of it in a very real way. If you do coaching with me, you hear me say, like, your 200th game of, like, Scam is not giving you the same returns that, you know, your 30th game does in a very real way. And you should be diversifying your practice and trying new things and doing different stuff. Amulet is one of those decks where the more you play it, you get a lot more out of it. It does eventually hit diminishing returns, but that deck is really good. And if you think you are a good combo player, this deck has proven to be really reasonable throughout all of Modern's history, basically, right now. And is something that, like, if you like it, you can pick it up, play it, and you will do well. You will lose a lot early on as you figure things out, but that's okay, because the more time you put in, the more you get out of it. And case in point, Dom Harvey. Crush it. He's been crushing it online, crushed it at the Pro Tour, and all these spots where Scam and other bad decks are very popular, and just continuously proves, like, if you master this deck, you can succeed.
All right, let's talk about a real jump. And we talked about this. People probably knew this was coming. 51 points, all of them combined, Omnath decks. Okay, I have to mention this on the show. 75 is an interesting number to get to. And I want to say why. I got to talk about this. One, we already have infinite data on 80 cards. So why just 75? Also, why not 74? Why not 73? Like, why did we get there? Especially, it seems like so much more work than just going to 80 and just already knowing that, like, the mana is good. I don't know.
I assume it's because you just don't have cards you want to play. Like, I had a lot of
enough good stuff.
Yeah, like, for example, you don't want to play a lot of cards, right? Like, that is...
You don't. No, I agree with that. But, like, the thing is you also have to avoid decking yourself with Beanstalk.
Yeah, and that... So, this is part of my problem with the. So this is I'm going to get a lot of flack for this.
Should we talk about the different versions before we dive too far into the 75? Maybe.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I wasn't going to talk about the 75 deck. It was kind of, I think, a flash in the pan. I think like having a few extra cards is good, but 75 to me, I would be very surprised if it's right. Yorion subsidized your deck a lot for being 80 cards, and I do not think Beanstalk is good enough to make your deck 75 cards. That's where I stand on that. We can talk about it more if you want, but that's like my sound bite.
So there were things that made sense with Beanstalk being 75 to me. Well, no, it didn't. 75 just seemed like an arbitrary number to me. Like I could see though. I think there was another one that was 66 over the recently. I can see
for Beanstalk's two extra lands.
Yeah, I can see wanting more cards because you draw a lot of cards with Beanstalk, and you're just like, no, I actually am a real threat of decking myself. I need both to play extra cards, and I probably need like an endurance in my deck to endurance myself. But I still think that you end up in a place where it's like, well, why don't you just play the endurance as the main and make sure that you don't deck yourself?
I like what you said there about like 66 cards. Like, I find it hard to believe 75 is the number just because it's so much more. And like, remember, for every time you go up spells, you have to go up a land too, right? It's not like you just get to go up spells. I think a good shorthand might be like 2 spells, 1 land is a way to think about it, right? Like I used to say like Yorion, I got like 12 free spells in my deck and I had 8 more fetch lands or whatever. I think that was the joke I would tell people, which is like, you're noticing that situation, not even true. Like the scale, it's like higher. Regardless, I think the reason to have more cards in your deck is because you do draw so many cards. And if you just make your deck 60 cards, 8 of your card slots would be dedicated to just drawing cards. And drawing cards to draw cards doesn't actually get you anywhere, right? And actually leads to more decking. So you have to have interaction. And the Beanstalk is pretty good. I just don't know, like, do we have to play 4 of the Bean? Like, does it have to be this way? I just find it very hard to believe that is the optimal thing. It could be, but
I'm a pretty big believer that like 4 cantrips equals about a land, right? So I'm gonna just read off a deck list really quick to talk about this, and then I'll be done with this. So we have 4 Icewind Quaddle, those draw a card. 1 Endurance, that one doesn't. 2 Eternal Witness, that one doesn't. 4 Omnath, I wouldn't consider that a cantrip. It's a little expensive. 1 Fury, 4 Solitude, 4 Ren and 6. 4 Teferi, wouldn't consider those lands. In fact, I would say that because you're a Ren 6 deck, you probably need to hit your land drops pretty early.
You have a lot of fetches.
Yeah. 2 Ephemerate.
1 land fetch Ren 6 is like a perfect hand. You keep that plus 4 cards every time.
3 Lightning Bolt, 2 Otherworldly Light, 4 Prismatic Enemies, 4 counter spells, 1 Eldamari's Call. You have 4 Expressive Iterations, another one that demands that you hit your land drops, but also lets you play less lands. 4 Abundant Growth, and 2 Dress Downs. Do you know this deck list, Mason?
No, I did not know that they played Expressive Iteration because it is not.
This is your deck list.
Oh, this is my deck list from back in the day?
It's also got a companion named Yorion.
I thought you were reading a Beanstalk deck list and we hadn't got to the Bean and the Ring yet. I thought you were like, and then they have those. I was like, you cannot play Bean, Ring, and Expressive. You just cannot do all of that.
My point is that this 80 card deck played 30 lands. 30 lands.
And for what it's worth, I think you can count Eternal Witness and Omnath as 1 land because together they generate like kind of enough mana. You know what I mean? Like Eternal Witness is Ren 6 at home would be the joke I say a bunch. Like I don't know.
My point is that like you in this deck were playing 30 lands in your 80 card deck with 4 Expressive Iterations, 4 Abundant Growths, like Ren and 6, Icewind Quaddle, like trying very hard to hit your land drop still. And to me, the 75 list did not do that. And the 6, like none of the other lists seem to do that the way that you need to for the number of colors of spells you're trying to play.
Yeah. And that sounds like that was before Leyline Binding 2 on yours, where like you have more triomes.
Yeah, this was literally DreamHack Dallas. This was
DreamHack Dallas. Okay, nice. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, Dress Down. Ooh, so smart. God, that was good. Anyways,
I wasn't trying to stroke your ego. I was trying to prove a point about mana.
You succeeded though. Anyways, it is hard to have a lot of cards that just cantrip and don't do anything, right? Like, if you'll notice, a lot of the cards Spencer mentioned on cantripping, like Icewind Coatl was like basically a Ragavan hate card, but also in the late game was like a kill spell. You very often would just flash it in, eat something in combat, and call it a day. Yeah, and you can just hold up and you also need something to hold up your counter spells with. Your Wrenn and 6s won the game or killed 1-drops, you know? Like, you had a lot of modality. And I understand, they're still playing Wrenn and 6, they're still doing some of these things. But having just 8 cards that draw cards, you have to have more cards in your deck. But it makes me think, is that actually worth it? Could I just play, like, 4 rings and a couple beans? Like, do I actually need to have 8 of these card draw things and just, like, have all the cards all the time? I don't think I need that to beat the decks I'm trying to beat. That said, I have been sort of a Omnath avoider recently, even though despite it doing very well, I've been playing a deck that I think is better than it for a little while now, and I considered Omnath for the Ragavan Invitational, and I might just, take it anyways, because I do like the deck, and I do think it is pretty good, but you won't catch me, I think, with like 75 cards, 4 bean, 4 ring. I'm probably going in there with like 4 rings and a bean, or maybe 2 beans.
So I do actually have an opinion on which of these versions I would be interested in playing. It is, in fact, the Blurring to Light version. Between Time Warp, the Ring, up the Beanstalk, it lets you play a lot, and Valky, for what it's worth. It lets you do a lot of interesting things. Play that kind of game that the deck like Mason was playing with, where you like have some tunable things. It actually makes a ton of sense, but we've never had, the right things for that to work. And Up the Beanstalk, while it does not help your good matchups, I think that it makes things like Bring to Light more interesting to make that help your bad matchups. Whereas I don't think that it was doing that before. So if it were up to me and you were like, gun to your head, Spencer, what version of this deck are you playing? One, I get to play Elishnorn as a 1-of and have it really be a 3-of, which is like one of the best cards in the whole deck. I get to play Wrath Effects. I get to play a Time Warp. I actually, this version of the deck has legs, and it saw in the same tournament multiple people doing well with the same list. I think one just missed out on top of it. This one took 7th just this last weekend. This would be where I'm at, Mason.
Yeah, I like the Bring to Light stuff. I think you mentioned a lot of great points there. And I think one thing I really like about it as well is like
that it's 60 cards.
It's 60 cards, which is nice. But like you mentioned, right, like having things like a Wrath is really good. Like Time Warp is like actually kind of strong, and the original versions of 4-color played Eternal Witness Ephemerate Time Warp as like a win condition, because the secret mode is Wrenn 6 plus Time Warp is game. And like actually having a way to win with your Wrenn 6 is good. And your deck has so many passive like card advantage things that if you just take another turn, like if I go the Ring, draw a card, take 1, draw 2, play Time Warp, pretend I don't have Bean, draw 3 or whatever. Like that's a lot of cards and gives me a lot of time. And that's assuming I don't have any Planeswalkers going or anything else going on. And that's like actually kind of nice as a 1-of. And it's like a 1-of that wins the game for you in a way that like you do need to win the game with the 4-color decks. That has been my biggest problem since losing Yorion. It used to be you could just trade resources and then play a 4/5 and you're like, surprise, I was Delver all along, 4/4/4, you're dead. And like you don't get to do that anymore. So I don't know, like the aspect of Bring to Light does let you actually win games, which is important. Like having Valky, like you mentioned, is important. So I like it.
Coming with 49 or 39 more points in first place is Scam.
That's 90 points, in case you forgot from a bit ago. 90 points. You could take their second and third place deck and combine them, and you would not reach first place.
Wow.
The Scam. What do you think, Spencer?
I'm actually pretty impressed. I think that Omnath and Coffers actually represent a large amount of played decks on Magic Online. So, like, the see that and still see Scam with 90 points is actually a pretty big deal. Like, I'm talking about a lot. Like, I think that Mono Black and Omnath make up a pretty huge percentage of the played decks for these events. I don't like calling for bans or anything, so I wouldn't do that. But I would not be... The problem is that I don't think Scam's a problem. Like, good players are winning with a good deck, and I just don't think that's a problem. I don't really know how to explain it outside of that.
I guess because what you're addressing, like a lot of people are complaining about scam, right? And I guess the question
if you go on
they
the
would
internet and ask anybody about scam, they want Fable banned. They want grief. Grief ban is like the most common one you hear. But
yeah, because turn one grief is like such is the problem. So I guess that is my question to you for the surrogate for the listener. Because I'm sure a lot of them are hearing you say this and they're like, okay, but what am I supposed to do to stop turn one grief, like double grief specifically?
I don't know. It's hard, right? Because like Mason's of the opinion that you just like mulligan to that kind of crap, and
I go to 4 all the time and have a very high win rate with scam.
Maybe that's the answer. I don't. I have played with, against, and watched a ton of. I'm watching a lot more Magic than I used to because of our conversation with Nathan, and I just have a hard time believing. One, I do think this is the best deck. I'm not questioning that. The question becomes like, is it because there's no counterplay to this specific thing that we have to address it? The thing is, scam didn't just used to be like grief you, like it also was like, turn 1 blood moon, or turn 2 blood, whatever, because of Ragavan and stuff. And Bowmasters gave this deck the card quality to make it so annoying. I don't know, man. I don't like calling for bans, and I actually think Modern's like in a really good place. So it's hard, but like, obviously, I don't like banning grief when like it's not even like, it's probably not in the top 10. Yeah, that's probably not true. It's not in the top 5 cards in Modern. Why are we banning a card that's like, I mean, it is the problem card, but I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I am very sympathetic to everyone that does not have a lot of fun playing against the scam deck, right? When you mulligan to 6 or whatever and your opponent kept 7 and they go turn 1 grief you and they take your force negation and then you then cast your spell, because that's how it works, and you get it back and you take the other best thing, that is a very emotional and feels bad. And I am sympathetic to you did not have a lot of fun. And I understand not enjoying that. That being said, I do think that there's a few things that jump out to my mind when people talk about the bans and also talk about sort of this in general, right? The first is like, one, there's always going to be a best deck. And those best decks often have some way to kind of bingo you, right? They have some Parmesan, some cheese. Grief just happens on the first turn. Is very hard to interact with. And yes, there are things like subtlety. Yes, there are things like solitude. Yes, there are things like Leyline of the Void post-board. But even then, those don't solve the problem a lot of the time. They often just delay it. And also like they just don't have to go for it in the case of Leyline. Sometimes they can just hard cast their grief. So like I am sympathetic to like it feels like there's nothing you can do. I think scam is sort of actually like a stompy deck, Spencer, to like use legacy terminology. I think you get on board quickly. Your first 1 to 3 turns matter a lot. You develop a lot of pressure, and you can backdoor yourself into like you can play a mid-rangey game, but you can't play a mid-rangey game against other mid-range decks. And I think strong scam players really overperform this deck because they understand like I need to like capitalize on my early turns. I have to mulligan. I have to get the snowball going. And that's why the games feel so bad for players, because they lose so quickly. But like it is also, you have to put cards like Not Dead After All, Feign Death in your deck, which are not particularly the best cards. And there are things you can do from a strategic standpoint to attack this, right? I think Rhinos is like pretty good against scam. It's not great or anything like that, but like having a bunch of subtleties makes a difference. Omnath is good against scam. It is hard, obviously, to like switch decks. Like I mentioned earlier in the show, it's hard for me to be like, hey, just buy a $2,000 deck. Like I don't expect you to do that, but like I do think there are things you can do.
What did you say was good against it?
I like Omnath against it, and then I think the Rhinos deck theoretically you could put a bunch of subtleties in your main deck to help. I don't know if that's worth it versus the metagame. Yeah. So like, like looking at the data or whatever. Oh sure, yeah. Yeah, and like if you like your opponent, like for example, Spencer's playing against me, right? Spencer knows I'm mulligan a lunch. He keeps a subtlety hand that's also pretty reasonable. I'm mulligan to 5, looking for a strong start, and then I go for the turn 1 even fury. Yeah, and he subtleties me unless I like have it actually rolled up with another 2 things in hand. like left over, it's like, oh, I'm just dead.
You're just,
I have to have another like red card or black card in the undeck. So like
it turns. I think one of the things that has happened. I'm going to say this, and I have another point. Is that pitch elementals have turned Modern into Legacy from a few years ago, and I think people aren't used to that kind of decision making power, and so they have a problem with that. They're like, listen, you think this is bad? Like, play against freaking Reanimator from a couple years ago, where you actually have 0 game, like nothing matters other than your opponent's opening hand. Like, I promise that didn't get banned either. Like, that just exists still.
Yeah, poor Soul Days is, surgical, holding the doors down.
Yeah, I mean, and if they're on the play, you better have a force in your hand.
I gotta say really quick, I love that Reanimator also plays the scam.
They play the stupid Praetor.
Well, yeah, sometimes they do. Yeah, I mean, it's funny to me that Reanimator plays Grief now to clear the way, but also sometimes you just like mulligan to 6 and you're like, oh, I have a turn 1 double Grief. That's pretty good.
Yeah,
that's very funny to me.
We were talking about that the other day. That's actually going to go against my point, though. My point is, though, that like your decisions matter a lot more in Modern now, which to me has made the format better. That means like your mulligan decisions matter. Mason's talking about mulliganing to 5 a lot. You guys have heard me talk about it. 4, yeah. You guys have heard me talk about the number of times that I mulligan in this format. And it's so different because we just came off of Pioneer season. So you're used to the play draw being the most important thing. And you need to get a good hand, and like all your decks have pretty good mulligan to 6s. So you don't really need to go, other than, the best deck in the format, which goes down to freaking 4 all the time too.
I'm sponsored by Wendy's, baby. The 4 for 4.
As I was saying, I was like, well, I guess Monograin actually goes down to 4 a bunch. But the point is like you have to make those hard decisions, and you have to do it knowing with an understanding of what's coming from the other side. And so, like, if you, like, the number of times where we're in a challenge match, whether it's me playing, whether it's Matt playing, whether it's Quinn playing, and we're like, okay, what about this hand? Well, what if I get griefed? Okay. Well, what if you get griefed? Well, is this hand dead to grief? Is it, like, that's a thing you can consider. And it's like, okay, but, like, should that be a tax on the format? I don't know. That's a different question. But I will say this. Looking at the data of decks that have over 200 plus matches with Grief, Grief only has 1 deck in the green, which means 55 or better. Only 1. It's Mono Green Tron. It dunks on that deck. Every other deck is less than 55, and only 2 of them are positive outside of that. It is very much a Jund style deck. It very much is a... Yeah, it can do what Mason says, right? Like, it can mull the 4 and beat you. But that's just a sign of a good Modern deck now. Like, that's just the new world you're in. You need a mulligan more. Your mulligans are really good. They're really powerful. You see 7 cards. So
yeah, London Mulligan changes that a lot, and the card design changes it a lot. It is not just London; it is also the like cards that are how they're designed and how they are made. So I do think people just don't mulligan enough. I don't think I mulligan enough, to be honest.
I don't mulligan enough.
Yeah, and like it is just a thing you should be doing more. And if you're playing Scam and you're having issues winning and you're listening to this podcast, it is probably because you are not mulliganing enough. If your 7-card hand does not have a Ragavan or a Scam or a strong sideboard card, or if you're on the play against a big mana deck and you have Dothian to discard spell, you should like mulligan it. I don't care how medium your hand looks. You're like, oh, I have Thoughtseize and the Bowmaster and the Fable. That's not good enough. That's not good enough to win games in Modern. It can win some, but not consistently. Just go to 6. And if you're down a card and you scam somebody, you're just so far ahead. Where you have Ragavan into protection. That is how you win games.
I actually think that, like, if you're wondering, like, how do I get better at this type of decision making, you should play a deck that, like, needs to mulligan a lot to win. So, like, maybe pick up Creativity or something. Maybe pick up
Scam.
I mean, yeah, Scam. That's a good. No, it's true. Like Creativity, Scam. Like if you're playing, I mean, there are players that like are still in their like blue white control, blue black control, like that's not what you're trying to do. It is in there. There's a lot of people that believe like if you don't have a spell pierce or one drop into protection with Murktide, you should mulligan. But like maybe the truth is develop those kind of rules for your deck. Like what are the rules for mulliganing for your deck, and why are they the rules? And make we've talked about rules of engagement for like large formats, but you also have rules of engagement for your deck. Why does your deck pass the rules of engagement for the format? And if you're not doing that with your opening hand, why are you keeping it?
I think it's also a huge sign for like a way to improve against your opponents, or like to learn, right? Like, let's say you're playing against me, right? And you've listened to the podcast. You're like, oh wow, I get to play against Mason, and I keep a 7-card hand, right, with Scam, and I don't turn one do anything super strong. There's probably something like, let's say it's game 2. I know your deck you're on. I probably kept some card or have something that is good against you. My deck is only so big. You might be playing a graveyard deck, and you're like, I could shock in my thing and leave up this kill spell for Dothy, or I can enter tapped. I guess I should probably shock to play around Dothy, and then you get to like kill Dothy and then like snowball the game, right? And I kept a hand because it did that thing. Your opponents are logical people who make rational decisions. Just assume they know what's up until they prove you wrong. Lots of times, if someone makes one mistake, I don't like suddenly start like making crazy lines. They need to like run their face into a wall like 10 times, and then I'm like, okay, I'm going to start playing differently, because you should just assume your opponents know what's up and they're making logical decisions. This is what Nathan Sawyer sits there and you watch him play. He's thinking about, why would my opponent have this hand? Why would they do this thing? They're a smart person. What's going on? Same thing here.
That's going to do it for the power rankings. Those are the 10 decks that you should care about right now going into your RC. Mason, what would you play and why?
This is tough. I definitely would suggest Scam. I think Scam is the best deck right now. I think it's very good. I think Yogg might be near Scam now, and like how good it is. I am a big believer in Agatha's Soul Cauldron. I am not big enough to tell you that you should play it over Scam. And I have Scam in my bag, and I have Yogg in my bag, and I'm gonna make the last second judgment call or whatever. But I think both those decks are really, really good. And I think Yogg is just really hard, but I think the Soul Cauldron stuff is super strong. I think every deck we talked about except for Burn and Titan Shift, I would be like, yeah, play that in your RCQ. You can probably win. But if I had to like pick a deck for me to play in 100 tournaments, it's going to be Scam. But, in my heart, I'm like, dang, Yogg might have been the secret choice. It's kind of great.
Yeah, I think for what it's worth that all of these decks are reasonable at this time of recording except for Burn. I think Titan Shift has an Amulet Titan problem for what it's worth, which I think is why Mason probably doesn't include it.
There's a Murktide problem too.
Yeah.
Murktide, Rhinos, all those decks I think it has issues with.
Sure.
But, yeah.
Right, I could believe Rhinos too. I think I convinced myself during this podcast I would play Bring to Light on Math. I don't know what happened from the start of this podcast to now. Like, but I think that's where my head is at. But I just think that there's so many good decks. Like, we didn't get to talk about some of the newcomers. Speaking of Cauldron, like the green white combo deck, the
Heliod.
Yeah, the Heliod deck. Like, there's so many good new decks. Weird. WoW was powerful. Woe was powerful. Woe changed Modern. It changed Standard. I think it'll change Pioneer. It's a sweet set with lots of really good cards. But yeah, I would play Bring to Light Omnath for the reasons that we talked about. I think that Bring to Light actually does help your bad matchups, and Beanstalk slams the door on your good matchups. So, Patreon question from Nick says, and by the way, if you want to ask a Patreon question, become a patron of $5 or more. You join the Discord. You also get access to the Discord where you can ask a question like Nick says, is there a way to fast track mulligan decisions for another deck for a deck other than jamming games? Yeah, I do this. We've talked about it on the podcast. It's a lot easier like when you're with a bunch of people, but get on a Discord call and just do it. Like, talk about hands together, post hands in our Discord, post hands with your friends. Just talking about mulligan decisions is actually way easier and way faster than jamming games, as long as you're getting to the why behind things. Not having an argument about like who's right, but actually the decision behind why. And so we used to play a game that we actually stole from the E-Team called Sneak, Keep, or Ditch, where you would either snap, keep a hand, like, it's actually not a hard decision, this is obviously keep. Keep a hand where it's like, I would keep this, but here's my caveat. And then ditch where like, there's no chance I'm keeping this. And we would debate the keeps as a group. Like, if everybody's ditching, it's obvious. Everybody's sneaking, it's obvious. But, like, debating the keeps is, like, really fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Nick, I'm going to say something here, and this is true for, like, a lot of players. They think jamming games is, like, and you're told kind of early on to just play a lot. It is often, if you have a question that is, like, is there a better way to do it than jamming games? The answer is probably yes. And I think mulliganing is the same thing. And I like what Spencer said about like getting a Discord call and doing that, but also maybe you don't have that situation, or maybe your time to practice, your friends are at work or whatever, blah, blah, blah. You can just like go to websites like Moxfield and load up a deck, and they have like a 7-card hand button at the bottom. You scroll down and you can just like look through those, and you could screenshot them. Like I mentioned, maybe you put them in the Discord and your friends reply hours later while you're at work or when they wake up, however it is. But like you can do that. Also, you can like reflect internally, right? And just think about like, should I be keeping these hands? What does it look like? And there's a lot of ways to do it. A lot of people do it where they think like, oh, I'm on 7 cards, and they click the mulligan, like, okay, now I'm on 6. Like when I have the 7-card hand, I'm like, okay, is this good as a 7? Is it good as a 6? Is it good as a 5? Would I go to 4? Like asking yourself those questions and really being reflective and having a why, like Spencer said, right? Like the why matters way more than the answer does, right? Because you understanding sort of what's going on is what matters. And I know that that's really hard for some players, and it's hard to figure out exactly what matters, but just start asking yourself questions like, what is going on? What matters, right? Like, for example, you're playing in Scam, right? You can assume in the dark, we can also assume in certain matchups, like, okay, I have white card Solitude and a bunch of lands, right? My opponent, like, would I keep this? Well, it beats turn 1 Grief, turn 1 Fury, turn 1 Ragavan. That's a hand to keep, right? Like that might be like where you sort of go to. And there's like a lot of differing opinions there, right? But like you can have a bunch of different things where Solitude white card is your force of will of Modern. And so with that in mind, mulligan accordingly, and like you can go lower.
I would encourage people that are going to go into like public Discords or, I'm going to make a channel in our Discord because of this question just for hands. We've typically had like people post stuff in like the always improving section, but I would encourage more of this. So I'll make one after this episode. But I would encourage people to use that scale that I talked about, where it's like, if everybody knows it's a keep, like, you don't need to post that. If you think it's a ditch, but think that people disagree with you, I say this, and then I think of Mason and Mikey's mono blue-white hand. So maybe I'm just wrong.
Yeah, I think you just have conversation, like, because you might just not know, right? And like, it's fine to be less skilled or weaker at mulliganing or new to a deck. No one should blame you for that.
No,
if someone's blaming you for that, then that's So like, it's okay to be like
Mason and I are really new to blue-white. Apparently, you just keep terrible hands. But no, I think that's true. Yeah, I'm gonna Nick. Thank you so much for this question. I thought it was a really good one, and we didn't even plan to have the mulligan conversation that we had at the end of the main topic.
Yeah, I didn't even know the Patreon question.
Yeah, but it just fit in so well. So thank you so much. If you have any questions or comments, you can go to the YouTube video, leave a comment or a question, and hear it on the air. You can also follow the show, join the conversation on that Patreon Discord. There is also a public Discord where people talk about all things nerddom, as well as Magic. We get limited content, pauper content, standard content, all kinds of things. You can also follow the show on Twitter at CCMTG, as well as other social media. We're on Instagram, posting those shorts. We're on Threads. You're everywhere. If you just look for CCMTG or CCMTG Pod, we'll be there for you. But one of the best ways to support the show, Mason, is to like, subscribe, or comment where you're listening. It is the best way to share the show with people, get it into those algorithms. If you're watching the show leave a comment. If you're like, oh, I clicked it from Twitter, comment on Twitter. Like it's the best way to do it. Mason, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Mason E. Clark. You can find me each and every week over at Card Kingdom, writing articles. This week I'm writing about, I think, a tier list for modern decks. So you can check that out for decks playing RCQ. You can find me at twitch.tv/TheMasonClark. I am moving very soon, and the place I am hopefully manifesting. We're going to. It has fiber internet, gig internet. So I'm hopeful to do that. Recently, this new place has had bad internet, which has been a thorn in my side. But new beginnings, new stuff. That's gonna be cool. So check out that as well. That's the thing I really do want to do a bunch for, but it's just been such a problem with my internet. So sorry about that. I know I mentioned it before. You can reach out to me for coaching. You can do that on Twitter. Once again, that's Mason E. Clark, or you can reach out to me via email, masoneclark@gmail.com. There's no E at the end of Clark. I know some people ask that question. And if you send me an email, just put coaching in the bio or the description. That way I know sort of what's coming through. I don't get some random person's email. Not going to click it if that's the case. And I do have some slots available, and it's starting to ramp up with the RCQ season, and the RC is just around the corner. The Canadian RC, Spencer, for Pioneer is just 2 weeks away. So we're getting into that season. We're sort of the end of it this season, which is a nice change. We've been near the start most of the time. So, it's going to be ramping up. So you're going to get that sooner is better than later. Spencer, what about you?
Yeah, so you can find me at Spencer13H on X as well as Threads. You can find me on TikTok. Just look for the same type of stuff. You'll find me. Really quickly, I did get some messages about coaching recently, and I'm actually not accepting anything right now, just with work and kids and stuff. So please go to Mason or Abe at More Nothings. They're great. Like you don't need me to be accepting people. And I think they both have slots. So Mason, what did you learn on the show this week?
I learned that despite your jokes about Yawgmoth, I think you are a Yawgmoth not truther. Oh no, that's sorry. That was interesting. The real interesting one was Rhinos versus Tron. You got away from the conversation.
Oh no. I think Rhinos asks a question about 8/8s or about 4/4s that Tron can easily answer. It does not put pressure on Tron enough, and its disruption outside of force is not good enough. Now, I will say we discussed, you and I and Matt, about like a subtlety version that beats up on Tron, but the data says that Tron is favored. My experience says Tron is favored, and I would say if you're not playing a bunch of subtleties main deck, you probably are not Tron favored.
Interesting. I guess in my mind, I just play a bunch of subtleties, so maybe that's where the difference is coming from. Is I'm going in there with like seven blue Kate cards, and the average person is not, which is a good thing for me to adjust for.
Yeah.
What about you?
I think that I learned about myself this episode. There's not a lot of times on the podcast where like I go into it and then change my mind about something during the show. But after talking about the Omnath deck, I'm actually kind of a believer, and I need to try it. But that Bring to Light deck sounds interesting. I had a really good conversation with former co-host Matt Kling about Up the Beanstalk, and I was like, and he talked about his problem with the card and how outside of certain decks, all it does is do things your deck was already doing. Your deck was already doing these things. And in Omnath, it definitely is doing that, right? Like the deck was already really good at drawing cards, really good at gaining card advantage. But I don't think that cards like Solitude and like with Beanstalk, like pitching a card and not losing a card, are the same thing as like actually changing the game while drawing a card. Like when you're both changing, like warping the game around the thing that you're doing, and then also you are gaining card advantage while doing it for something that you've already invested your mana into, actually is kind of what Yorion was doing, right? It is in a similar vein of like, okay, I'm going to win the game with this thing now, and I'm also going to recoup card advantage while doing it. So that if it doesn't work out, we're still in the same place we were before. So that interests me a lot.
Sure, that makes sense. Yeah, I think it is interesting. Beanstalk just turning whatever, specifically when you pitch cast, you're basically cycling the card like you're pitching, right? Which is like strictly better, right? Like if I had to cycle a card in order to put my Solitude of Fury into play, obviously I'd play that card. So it is very interesting to see sort of how it changes stuff. And I'm curious to sort of see as time goes on, like, will 3 Beanstalks become the norm? You know, like, do you like what happens, especially if the ring ever goes? You know, it's like, if the ring goes, I think I'm Beanstalk to the moon, you know, 4 of them, obviously. But, like, it's just hard to have a lot of cards that draw a lot of cards if you just end up not doing much. That being said, if Beanstalk was white, holy cow, I would be playing this deck all over the place. My cantrip that pitches to my Solitude, wah-wah-wee. But, you know, not the world we live in.
That is going to do it for this week's episode. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Mason. And everybody, throw your hands up in the air. I saw Mason's wanting to live situation here, and we got to send him that good energy. Love you, dude, and we'll see everybody next time on another episode of Constructed Criticism.